Hello, BookTube, and welcome to People April, the waning days of a BookTube event created by Ross at Skelly Handling About the Books and Elizabeth at Bookends and Books, designed to celebrate biographical writing of all kinds, memoirs, celebrity bios, ghostwritten stuff, letter collections, full dress biographies, and which is my favorite kind of writing. So I've been right on board with People April in the month of April. And I didn't do a video yesterday. All throughout April, I accumulate my night's reading as I go about the day reading. I read all day long, and then I accumulate my night's reading. And I have been adding something biographical to every night's reading, usually picked more or less at random, just to keep learning and to keep the excitement here. A lot of stuff that I haven't read before. Then I make a video the next day. And I didn't do that yesterday. I didn't do a People April video yesterday. And one of you wags wrote me an email suggesting that the reason I didn't do People April yesterday is because I, A, hate reading biographies, and B, hate reading. So that led to a very peppy, very hilarious email exchange. But no, the real reason was that I read an immense work. I read a 2-volume biography. That I believe is the first time I've ever read this. I think I read part of the first book eons ago when I was researching somebody else, when I was researching another figure. I think I read the first, or maybe the first part of the second book. I doubt very much that I read the whole thing. I think I would have remembered the reading experience that I got. The reading experience, the book here is a 2-volume biography by Arnold Dallimore of George Whitefield, the preacher. From 2 centuries ago, here in America and also overseas. But here in America especially, leading massive revivalist religious hysteria events in open fields. That was his main thing to do. He would preach anywhere, in any kind of building, but he most liked preaching and exhorting to huge crowds in open fields as part of the so-called Great Awakening. And I've read and even reviewed other biographies of George Whitefield, but I had never read all of this big, fat 2-volume biography, which is different from the other biographies of Whitefield that I've read in that this is also ecstatically religious. And this is what I mean when I talk about what I appreciate in biographies. I know a lot of people who read biographies who would utterly dismiss this the minute that they learned that the author is fervently religious and shares a religious worldview with the subject and thinks that the subject was ordained of God. I know a lot of people who would look at that and think, oh, well, why would I bother to read it then? It's not objective biography. I don't know what to say to such people. This author is extremely punctilious with the original sources. He is nevertheless an ecstatic writer. So it was a surreal experience. The last biography of Whitefield that I read was about 10 years ago. I think I reviewed it. I'll try to remember to leave a link to the review if I can find it. But keep in mind, if you're curious, as in all cases, if you're curious if I've written about a book, just go to Google, type in my first name, my last name, and then the name of the book. In this case, George Whitefield, and you will get, that's how I look, that you'll get as many results as are easily accessible to anything that I've written about this figure. I've written about a lot, so chances are good. But all the other biographies that I've read of this figure have been actual, objective, historical biographies. They have not attested to facts not in evidence. And, of course, the biggest fact not in evidence anywhere in the history of the world is God. There's no evidence for goblins of any kind. George Whitefield didn't have any such evidence, even though he made thousands and thousands of converts, often with those very theatrical open-air exhortations, where he would bounce all around the stage, his voice carried like crazy, his gesticulations would be wild, almost supernatural. These performances took a lot out of him. He was often sick for days when he finally made his way down off the platform. He was often sick for days. He was a weird figure, spindly, portly, balding, not favored by nature at all. had a severe astigmatism that is not present on the cover of either of these books. It's also not present in a lot of his prettified portraits. A lot of the portrait painters of 2 centuries ago airbrushed that detail. And why? The why doesn't reflect well on Christianity. The why is because they had just reflexively, as they had been for centuries before, calling such astigmatisms the mark of the devil. And all of a sudden, the most powerful, most charismatic preacher in the entire world comes forward and has eyes facing in 2 completely different directions. We're not talking about a little division here. We're talking about completely distracting when you talk to him. And this book covers all of those facts, covers his unassuming boyhood, covers his weird apprenticeship, covers his what I think anybody would have to call meteoric rise to fame, covers the massive amount of missionary work that he did here in the United States. Dallimore doesn't. Of course, he touches on the unsavory aspects of this character. George Whitefield was an extremely unsavory character in a lot of ways. He was mean-spirited. He was a bore, a grind. He was an incredible sexist. He was such a racist that he was wholeheartedly in favor of slavery. He wasn't a savory figure at all. I think the one thing that, of course, Dallimore brings up some of these things, but always glancingly. Other later biographies bring them up damningly, saying this is definitely a figure that's worth studying, but we're not going to draw a veil over shortcomings of such magnitude. The one aspect of Whitefield that I have never read a biographer really bring up is whether or not George Whitefield was a grifter, or whether or not he was a financial fraud. He had crowds here. If he were alive today, he would be packing megachurch auditoriums. And everyone, without exception, today, who packs megachurch auditoriums is a financial grifter. Without exception. They are all grifters. They are all more interested in their multiple planes, their multiple jets, their multiple homes than anything that's coming out of their mouth when they're up at the lectern. And if you told them, or rather if some sort of goblin that had to be obeyed came and told them, you can keep doing that preaching, but you have to give up every bit of the rest of it. Go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor. If a goblin, a supernatural being of some kind, came to Joyce Meyer or Joel Osteen or Kenneth Copeland, for God's sake, and actually said that, they'd say, nope, no thanks, won't do it, not interested at all. No, it might have been when I was, when I was a tiny little reed of a kid, when I was young and new, but I wouldn't do it now. I don't believe it. Now, all I care about is the money now. It's hard for me to believe that George Whitefield was the only exception to that, but maybe he was. Everyone who met him thought he was remarkable, including Benjamin Franklin. So they might have found him, a little bit hard to take, a little bit carping, a little bit grating, a little bit petty. The accounts, even Dallimore really can't dampen it. Some contemporary accounts, it's a note that when you read a great big life like this, I read one volume one night and then the second volume the next night, a note crops up in a few contemporary sources that you really can't miss once you have an ear for it, which is a tiny little detail that is so idiosyncratic it must be true. People mention over and over again how unpleasant it was to share a meal with George Whitefield. Not just that he would be God-bothering the whole time, but how he ate, the way he ate, the way he acted, the way he chewed, the way he hoarded food on his plate or censured others for what they were eating in the middle of the meal. A detail like that crops up once. Okay, fine. It's someone who is trying to character assassinate. If it crops up a few times in unconnected sources, then probably it's the truth. And little things like that crop up all the time. I think this would have been an odious little toad of a person to know, I guess, is what I'm saying. But Dallimore shares his faith and often indulges himself in long apostrophes about faith and about God moving in mysterious ways. You get a lot of Whitefield's writing in here, a lot more than you get in any secular biography of this figure. Lots and lots of it, which is good. That is really good in a way. If you go into a biography like this with your wits about you, which I believe you need with any biography, if you go into a biography of George Washington, for instance, that wants to tell you from page 1 what a military genius was, you have to have your wits about you. You have to read some of the endless string of military debacles that he created and say, okay, but was that genius? You keep telling me that was genius, but that doesn't seem like genius. That seems like the opposite of genius. Okay, same thing here. You have to keep your wits about you because the author believes that his subject was touched by God. But if you do, there's a huge amount of biographical work here and a good deal of eloquence. It's God-bothering eloquence, but it's eloquence all the same. I have only heard about this thing. There are two schools of studying George Whitefield. One is secular and one is religious. And the religious school of studying this figure always quotes from this book. No surprise to me now that I've read the whole thing. And the secular does not, because they view it, I think incorrectly, that this can't possibly have any merit because it's obviously not objective. I don't get that. That's actually an insult to 1700 generations of Christian scholars who cared about provenance of facts. Just because they believed in God doesn't mean they didn't care about those things. So this was a bracing reading experience. Not for everybody. I would say almost not for anybody. If you're interested in George Whitefield, definitely don't start with this. You definitely want to start with one of the more recent biographies. There was one just about 10 years ago. I'm forgetting the name of it, but I'll try to link to it down below. You would do well to start there rather than this. This would be if you were really on board with pretty much every aspect of Whitefield's story. But it got me back in the saddle for people. April, we've just got a couple more days, so I won't be picking any more 2-volume biographies because I want to do a video every day between now and the end of the month. So I'll pick something shorter for tonight, or maybe something longer. My reading docket for tonight is surprisingly wide open considering it's late morning. So it should be crowding up by now, and it's not. So I might read a longer work. And the one thing I haven't done for people, April, is reread an old favorite. I feel like breaking new ground in this month to indulge myself, but maybe I'll do that tonight. I don't know. I'll wait, I'll spin the wheel, and then we'll find out together tomorrow. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.